the second Political Soul Food Forum. I'm your host and moderator, Dr. Kasaun Henry, and I have an amazing group of panelists, scholars, social activists from various disciplines who are very much concerned about the issues that the Black community encounter. And so I would like to introduce them by name and then let each of them tell you a little bit about themselves. And then we'll begin our panel discussion on what does Black progress look like. So I would like to thank everyone who came out to Tsion Cafe. On that note, can we all give a loud applause and hand of gratitude to the owner, the gracious Queen, BJ. We're at Tsion Cafe in Harlem, New York, and BJ was so amazing. I sent her an email to inquire about using her lovely space, and we sat down and talked, and within minutes, she gave me the thumbs up, and I was the happiest guy on the block. And I literally live on this block, all right? So that's not a hyperbole. You know, when we talk about Black progress, this will factor in, and I don't want to jump the gun. We have people, you know, working together, trying to make things happen, right? And so this is an incredible opportunity, and it speaks wonders. And I'll say much of what I want to say about someone allowing, you know, somebody else in the community trying to do something in their location. That says a lot, right? But let me just come back to that, and I want to start off with Dr. Sharon Williams. So let's give her a hand, please. All right. And let's give a hand to Reverend Dr. Glen Bembry. Let's give him a hand. And so I would like Dr. Sharon to introduce Dr. Sharon Williams. Introduce yourself and give us a little bit about who you are and what you do, your scholarship, your areas of interest.
All right. I am Dr. Sharon Kimberly Williams, and I am a professor of religion and culture at Iona University in New Rochelle, New York. I am the director of the Peace and Justice Studies program, which means I am a woman on fire for justice. Right. Come on now. Okay. That's what we need. We need more of that. We need more of that. So my goal is, as a educator, is to try to spark in young people a social consciousness that is going to allow them to be relevant in these times, to be change agents for these times, and to really find out what their passion's about and find ways to go in and become advocates and activists. It's very, very easy to take someone who says, I feel passionate about a thing, and then teach them how to go out in the world and really put a passion, to put some action behind their passion. So that's a little bit about me. And thank you for inviting me to be here, Dr. Henry.
It's my pleasure. All right, that's a wonderful introduction. And Dr. Bembry, the same. Please tell us about yourself, your work in theology, your work and social activism, and as a scholar.
Hello, my name is Reverend Glen Bembry. I am presently, I need to summarize all this information. I served for 42 years as an active, full-time senior pastor with 3 churches, 2 in New Jersey, and I landed in Brooklyn before I retired, Trinity Baptist Church in Brooklyn. I was there for 22 years. I retired in March of last year, and I thought after I retired it was over. But of course, the higher power says no, it's not over. So I'm presently the interim senior pastor of the oldest Baptist church in the city of Newark, the First Baptist Petty Memorial Church, 222 years old, made up of over 20 nationalities of people. I've only been there 1 month, and I told my sister here, I'm still learning all these different nationalities. So I have always been an advocate of social justice because I'm a baby boomer. I was born in the midst of the segregation of the civil rights movement. I was born in the state of Georgia, and my family migrated to New Jersey in 1965 because my father had a vision, at least he thought in his head, that he was going to run from the segregated South and come to the great promised land of the North. only to find out that New Jersey would have a riot in 1967. So I lived through that trauma, and I am an advocate for social justice, particularly with young people. I do a lot of mentoring. I'm a mentor by nature. I'm very proud of Dr. Henry. So I mentor a lot of young people, and that's enough about me. All right?
Amen.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. So, in preparation for this talk, this discussion, I wrote out an introduction because this is a topic that sort of like playing double dutch in some ways. It's easy to jump into, as we all should do, but there are some nuances and some subtleties in this question, what does Black progress look like, that I wanted to bring out and, in a sense, render unto the panelists to chew on. Because this question means a lot to people of color. I mean, if you look at the recent Supreme Court decisions, and all the violence, it's violence not just physical, but social, economic, political, right? Targeting people of color. This question, for some, is nothing but a myth, and for others, there's hope. And so let's talk about it, right, in a way that relates to the lives of real people. And so with that in mind, so here's what I have here, just to bring out some of the subtleties in this. I'm sure the question, what does Black progress look like, will elicit a variety of responses. The reason is that there are two concepts that do not inspire a consensus. The first is the term progress, and the second is Black. In other words, we must consider two other questions before we begin to entertain the notion of Black progress. What is progress, and what is meant by Black? Briefly, progress may simply refer to the notion of an improvement or the evolution of something from a simple state to a more complex one. An example of progress as improvement is the ability of an amateur gymnast to finally execute a backflip after a year of unsuccessful attempts. On the other hand, progress could be noted in the evolution of a single-cell organism to intelligent, speaking, multi-limbed animals, such as Homo sapiens sapiens. In this discussion, I will argue that progress will be used largely to refer to the idea of improvement, as in the notion of better to worse. But the plot thickens. Improvement of what and for whom, you might ask. Now, let's return to the word Black in the question, what does Black progress look like? It is easy to take for granted that the word Black refers to Americans of African descent. However, in his book, Disintegration, The Splintering of Black America, Eugene Robinson warns us that Black people in America fall under four overarching categories. He writes, disintegration isn't something Black America likes to talk about, but it's right there, documented in census data, economic reports, housing patterns, and a wealth of other evidence just begging for honest analysis. And it's right there in our daily lives if we allow ourselves to notice. Instead of one Black America, now there are four. A mainstream middle-class majority with a full ownership stake in American society. A large abandoned minority with less hope of escaping poverty and dysfunction than at any time since Reconstruction's crushing end. A small transcendent elite with such enormous wealth, power, and influence that even white folks have to genuflect. And finally, two newly emerging groups, individuals of mixed race heritage and communities of recent Black immigrants that make us wonder what Black is even supposed to mean. These four Black Americas are increasingly distinct, separated by demography, geography, and psychology. They have profiles, different mindsets, different hopes, fears, and dreams. As you can see, Robinson has given us something to think about during this discussion. He is echoing what I'm sure many of you have heard at some point. Black people are not monolithic. While I may agree, I will step out on a limb to say that the dreams of the four Black Americas Robinson delineated including the panelists' answers to the question on the table, will share the same philosophical grounding. I might be wrong. Let me elaborate on what I mean by sharing the same philosophical grounding through the lyrics of the American R&B singer Kevin Michael. In the hook of his song titled "We All Want the Same Thing," released under the album with the same name in 2007, Kevin Michael says, "All my gangster friends and all my skater friends, we all want the same thing, we all want the same thing. DJs in the club, Jesus freaks and thugs, we all want the same thing. All my ex-girlfriends and all their new boyfriends, they all want the same thing. They all want the same thing. From Wall Street to the hood, New York and Hollywood, we all want the same thing." Okay, let's grapple with the notion that Jesus, freaks, and thugs and the folk on Wall Street and in the hood want the same thing. What could that thing possibly be? With the help of Mary J. Blige, I believe I figured it out. In her 1994 single, "Be Happy," Mary sings, "All I want to be is to be happy." I think she got to the bottom of it. All humans, and maybe divine and holy figures like Jesus and Muhammad, want to be happy. Mary seems to be teaming up with the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who proposes that everybody seek happiness. In the Greek language, that is eudaimonia. Happiness for him is not simply a feeling of joy, confidence, or satisfaction of wealth. For him, happiness is the good life, which consists of living free from the evils of disgrace, poverty, disease, friendlessness, and death. However, it also includes the moral quality of the life we live and the choices we make. So that's for him, happiness. Aristotle, basically, his perspective is that we also have to live virtuously. So I will stop here. We don't have much time to unpack this. But I hope that I've given you all a sense of the depth and complexity of the question, what does black progress look like? That is, what would be deemed an improvement for black Americans with a variety of experiences and realities? What would be the best means to improve their lives? How do we know when their lives are being improved? And with that, I'm going to turn to the panelists for them to present their understanding of this question, what does black progress look like, and also to proffer their answers and solutions. So we'll start with Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. You've given us a lot to think about.
I'm still thinking too.
Yes. And there's a thing, though. I want to say it this way. So how do we accurately measure this question of black progress, right? So in the book, The Black Progress Index, the Brookings Institute, along with NAACP, uses the following indicators, right? Life expectancy and longevity, right? Where we are at 74.8%. Social determinants of health, right? How healthy are we? Are we dying at a rate that is faster than other communities? Home ownership rate, 0.4%. That is where we are with home ownership. Educational attainment, where we are at 22% of people having at least a bachelor's degree. And then the air we breathe, air pollution. And as we're sitting in Harlem, USA, we know that as I was coming here on the subway, a woman is using her nebulizer right on the subway train, on the A train coming to this venue, right? So life expectancy, social determinants of health, home ownership, education, and air quality. That is what they have used to determine, to look at in terms of statistics of how we can start to assess this question. So I want to focus on the first two that align with my values, which are health and survival, life expectancy, right? Because if we can't survive, then we don't have anything else to talk about. When we looked at what happened with COVID-19, right, and the way that all the health disparities were all at once in front of us. The fact that we didn't have what we needed in our local hospitals, we didn't have what we needed in our communities. It made, at our forum back at Drew University, the Religion and Global Health Forum, it made us run a session entitled, "Is Being Black Bad for Your Health?" Because every correlation that we looked at connected to what it meant to be black also connected with the quality of health. Someone on our panel, we had a wonderful doctor who's actually the son of Marcus Garvey, Dr. Julius Garvey, shows up, and he talked about the correlation between health and wealth. Where you find wealth, you will also find health. And that's a hard way to look at it, because a lot of our communities are, that wealth is what is absent. So what else is going to be absent are those quality health systems, those hospitals that do the specializations, right? So in this question, after the pandemic, we had to really take a look at ourselves. So I'd want everyone to just imagine for a moment, what would have happened if we had eliminated these health disparities in the past century? Had we not done this medical apartheid where some have full access and others have no access? Had we not done that, had we foregone that, what would have been the outcome, right? We would have had fewer black deaths overall, including deaths from cardiovascular disease, right? Deaths from infants being born and dying in the first year of their young lives. Fewer incidents of mothers giving birth and dying in childbirth, black mothers, right? Fewer deaths as a result of diabetes, fewer deaths as a result of breast and prostate cancer, right? These are the kinds of things that would have happened if we had dealt with the fact that now we have people of color, black people who are free in this country, and we cannot just allow thousands of people to die at a time and millions of people to die at a time. We have to get these disparities up to a level so that no matter what community you're in, you're getting the same quality of care in one state. It can't just be you go to these top counties and they'll have the best health care. County, you go in a hospital and you don't even know what's going to happen when you check out, right? So I look at these kinds of issues, and then these kind of barriers to the quality of health care, where you have 44 million Americans who are uninsured, who have no ability, if they had an emergency in their families, a health crisis. This is what happened during COVID, and people found themselves in a very perilous situation. The black doctors in our country are only making up 10% of the physicians in this country. So that means we have fewer people who can come into the community to actually serve and be on the front lines of healthcare, right? So that means there's nobody able to do screenings. There's nobody who's able to really do the early diagnosis, right? And then the cultural competency, where you have a situation where if you're a person of color and you go in to see a doctor who is not accustomed to dealing with your culture, they may not be able to give you the best quality of care because they're not culturally sensitive, right? So these are some of the things that really, all of these reasons, why we need to start figuring out ways to advocate for health policy reform. We have to start figuring out ways to make more accessibility, because health care needs to start to be looked at as a human right, right? So the book of Isaiah, Reverend, talks about it this way. It says, "Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people." So when you see legislators cutting back Medicaid, cutting back Medicare, not making provisions for health, that is a spiritual crisis. That is a crisis, a crisis, a crisis, a crisis, a God. And we do not deserve to just die because of lack of health care, lack of access to quality health care, right? So how do we look at these leaders and now and figure out where their moral compass is, and neglecting this whole topic of health care? It's a prescription for death of millions of those, particularly who are in marginalized communities, who are sensitive to this lack of what? Resources, right? And COVID brought this all to light. So the moment there's a crisis, that's what's going to put us at risk more than anything. So to my moderator colleague, Dr. Henry, has there been progress just on the one indicator that I chose to focus on, at least for my introduction here, the issue of health care? I would say yes and no, and here's why. There has been a slight bit of progress. It was reported that there's a 40% decline in the uninsured as a result of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. So since 2010, there has been an actual what vulnerable to political tactics, right? So it's here today. I'm a proud member of the Affordable Care Act, because when you're a teacher, you never know what school is going to have your coverage. So I just stuck with it, and it's been something that has carried me through this space. So is there progress? In small ways, yes, but we can do better. We can do better, and for those who are looking at anything between Medicaid and Medicare, Obamacare, these are tools, political tools, that are always going to be vulnerable, because the minute the budgets start to get tight, that's the first thing that starts to get looked at. How can we cut health care for people who are moderate to low income? And that's the first thing that gets attacked. So I'm going to stop here, and we can engage some more, and hopefully everyone can also see that for us, health and our survival is a top priority.
Yes, thank you. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Have a lot of notes and some questions, but before I get to these, we're going to move to Dr. Bembry to get his perspective, take, and assessment on the matter of Black progress.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. I'm like a lost person right now, because normally I'm a manuscript person. I write everything down, but I did not do that today. Assessment of Black progress, and also Dr. Henry. So I'm going to wiggle through my training as a theologian. I'm going to talk about Black progress in the context of the Black church, which, as we know, has always been at the center of Black progress in America. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did something very noble in the 1950s. He challenged churches to wake up and do something about social justice. And as we know the history of Dr. King was highly rejected by his own counterparts. The Reverend J.X. Jackson from the Olivet Baptist Church in Chicago took an adamant opposal to Dr. King, saying the church has no business being involved in the civil rights movement. So Dr. King took the noble task of leading Black churches from this. So when I think about Black progress, I can't help but go to religion, the Black church, because that has been our basis for progress in America. So if we go back to my brother, Dr. I call him Dr. Frederick Douglass because I love this guy. His book, The American Slave, we see that Frederick Douglass is sort of navigating through a lot of progress for his time. As we know, Frederick Douglass became one of the most noted African American, I call them scholars for his day, because he was working with President Abraham Lincoln to critique the writing the Emancipation Proclamation, and Frederick Douglass often is pushed out of history. I did a presentation for a very white audience who were asking me, why, Dr. Bembry, are you asking us to read Frederick Douglass? I'm like, okay. These white folks don't know anything about our history. So I had to educate this white PhD audience on psychoanalysis about Frederick Douglass and why he brings to the world of psychoanalysis issues. And so Frederick Douglass actually deals with trauma. So if we're going to talk about black progress, we have to realize that we have historically been rooted in slavery, racism, and all of that has created trauma for many people of black and brown backgrounds. So trauma is deep. I've just read an article this morning by Dr. Beverly Stout. She's a professor down at Emory University in Atlanta. She has done a lot of work on trauma, and she is actually sent me an email the other day telling me she's going to send me her new book. So this sister is really on, as they say, spot on. She's spot on with the progress of trauma, racism. So I think we need to start with progress with evaluating how we have experienced trauma in this country and what have we done to address the racial issue. Frederick Douglass is quoted as saying, "There is no progress without struggle. There is no progress without struggle." So there has been a lot of struggles in America around racial justice and trying to, set people free. As we know, the Emancipation Proclamation was not really the time, even though it happened in 1863, there was a delayed response to the Emancipation Proclamation. So we have the Juneteenth celebration, which shows us that there was a delay with setting black people free from slavery, because of due to the writing of the Emancipation Proclamation. So I think we need to start historically with progress, with looking at our history. I love history, so I'm starting there as number one, as a critique of how we evaluate progress. I think there's still a lot of work that we need to do to educate people. I did a workshop this morning in Newark, New Jersey, around trauma and resiliency for a black church in Newark, and I think it was successful. The people enjoyed learning about trauma and how, historically, black and brown people, we have been tremendously resilient people. We can handle a whole lot. So when the pandemic came, most people who were African descent, we just said, okay, here comes another issue. But we were able to navigate through it because of our strong resiliency. So number two, and this is where, and my sister was talking about health, I think the pandemic also opened up the multi-complexities of issues around health. And now I am being trained in mental health, and I'm learning that the pandemic brought to light the injustices of health benefits. Mental health is another social justice issue where many people of color do not have access to mental health. First of all, we don't even know what is it about. When you mention to a black and brown person about having a therapist, they're like, oh my God, you think I'm crazy? No, a therapist is crucial to living and surviving. So there needs to be more education around, I think, when we look at progress, around the issue of wellness, health wellness, and that's a holistic term, my sister. Health wellness is physical, mental and spiritual. It's all connected. So I think we have to look at those issues. Number 3, James Cone wrote a powerful book called, he was comparing Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. And I used this book over and over again when I was teaching religion at Bloomfield College. And I love how Malcolm critiqued Dr. King. Here it is, Dr. King saying, I have a dream that one day this nation shall rise up and live up to the true meaning of its creed. Malcolm said to Dr. King, I don't see a dream, I see a nightmare. That's Malcolm. And we know that Malcolm was a real person. He was what I call a realist, whereas Dr. King was all in this, I have a dream. Malcolm says, I see a nightmare. So I think there are many nightmares that we're looking and experiencing now when we talk about black progress due to the U.S. Supreme Court decisions this week, which have been massive. And Clarence Thomas really needs some mental health, in my opinion. This man has lost it. He's angry. He's retaliating. He doesn't care about the needs of black people. So our Supreme Court justice system is really a mess right now, and it's scary that we have to look at that, So that's another element. And then finally, I'd like to conclude my thoughts by saying that it's around the reading of, I'm reading Raphael Womack's book now called A Way Out of No Way. And Womack has this powerful thing in here. He's telling us the story about his life and how he was able to wiggle through his education. He came here to Harlem, as we know, to work at the Abyssinian Baptist Church here in Harlem. And he was talking about how he had no money, he was really struggling. And he tells his story about how the late Calvin Butts took him under his wing and mentored him and developed him. And what I see in this book is that Raphael Womack, who is our senator from Atlanta, is really educating us to the fact that black progress is something that we have to realize that, there's a song that we sing in the church that says the Lord will make a way somehow, like a ship that's tossed and driven, battered by an angry sea, and I wonder what makes this race so hard to win. And then the hymn says, the Lord will make a way somehow. There is, in our experience as people of color, the belief that somehow, I remember I did a sermon series called the Theology of the Somehow, where we don't know how we're going to get through things, but the Creator, God, whatever we call the Creator, has a way of helping us to make a way out of no way. So I think in my remarks, I want to end there by thinking about progress in the element of how God, hello, my brother. All right. How the Creator has endowed us to make a way out of some way. So I'm going to end with Marvin McMichael. Marvin McMichael has written some great books. This is one. He's written about 15 books. This book is called Pulpit and Politics. What Dr. Marvin McMichael argues is that when it comes to black people, there's really no separation between religion and state. And we hear our mayor, Eric Adams, saying that all the time. This guy runs around New York City talking about, I'm a mayor who does not believe in separation of church and state. And I heard Eric speak a few weeks ago at in Brooklyn, and I'm looking at Eric standing in this church talking like a preacher. I'm like, woo, that's deep. He's the mayor of New York, but he's talking like a preacher. Well, I think Mayor Adams has embraced the fact that when it comes to leadership as a black mayor here in the New York City area, that he has to embrace our faith and identity. And I think that's a sign of progress too. I mean, some people would say, no, he doesn't, he's still Pharaoh, he's still the mayor, so how can he integrate church and state? So I think these are my reflections about progress. I hope I answered the question, but those are my thoughts, Dr. Henry. All right.
Thank you. And Dr. Whaley is here just in the nick of time. So yeah, I gave a little context to this question, which I don't have time to review, but I would throw something out here. So far, I've been hearing, and I'm sure you have, a lot about mental health.
Yes.
And physical health, right, at large. And Dr. Whaley actually specializes in public health, mental health. He's a psychologist. So I would like for you to, Dr. Whaley, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your area of focus, and then share, your opening statement on the question, what does Black progress look like? How do you frame that question, and what are your answers to that question? And then after Dr. Whaley, I'll jump in with some questions for all of you.
Thank you. First, let me apologize. I just had a number of issues. One is I forgot the time. I just checked it out. And two, I have an eye infection, so forgive me. When I think about, my area has been said is I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I'm a psychiatric epidemiologist, which is my second degree by training. So mental health is one of my specializations. I've treated patients, suicidal patients, schizophrenic patients, and the gamut substance abuse patients. I've been in psychiatric hospitals and so forth, and so I've been in jails, so I've seen the gamut. I think what I would like to say in terms of the question, in terms of what does Black progress look like, one of my favorite quotes that was given by El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, better known as Malcolm X, is he said once, if you take a knife and you plunge it into a man's back 12 inches and you pull it out 6 inches, that's not progress. And amen. I always remember that quote. It's a very profound quote, very simple but very profound. And I always think about that quote when I think about Black progress, because we've gone far, but we still have much far way to go to wound the heels of oppression. So my way of thinking about Black progress, and I've read it quite a bit. I've been in this field for over 35 years, and I've seen a lot of horrific things happen to Black people, and I've tried to ameliorate it in my own simple way. But it's still an ongoing progress. It's an ongoing struggle. And one of the things that I always say about our struggle, it seems like it comes in cycles. Recently, the most recent watershed event is the overturning of affirmative action in colleges. I remember Bakke. Yes. I remember the very first case. I remember protesting in support of that case when I was a student. And nowadays it's been overturned. So Roe v. Wade is another thing has been overturned. A precedent that lasted for 50 years. So what do we say when these things happen? Is it progress? Did we make progress? If we define progress as lasting 50 years, yes, we did make progress. If we define progress as lasting in perpetuity, no, we didn't make progress. So it depends on how you define progress. It depends on which way you're looking at the problem. And sustainability is one of the issues that we must always talk about in terms of progress. I remember when Obama became president, a lot of people who voted for Obama didn't vote in local elections. And their response were, well, I've already done my duty. I voted for a Black man for president. That's what can you do? What's the highest thing you can do? I don't need to do anything else. So you have to be careful with these issues of understanding what it means to be progressive and to make progress as a people. So I think that other 6 inches needs to be pulled out of the womb for us to make absolute progress.
Thank you. Oh, this is good. Oh, we're going to have a good one. We're going to open up questions and after this first round. we're going to have some good questions. I can say that right now. One of our previous panelists is here, Jones Murphy. If you've seen the last discussion, you would remember him. So let me entertain some of these points all of you made. One thing I've noticed in this discussion among the panelists is that Black progress was not measured or framed in terms of employment and wealth, as you would hear most sociologists and other social scientists measure it, which is interesting here. Some may argue this discussion is missing the mark. Others might say, well, they're digging deeper into the understanding of progress. And I would think it's that. So Dr. Williams brought out health, right? Being able to live, simply just live, right?
Survival.
Survival and life expectancy, right? And that hit me because I thought about it as you were talking. If one is able to live a long time, then there's certain conditions that will allow that, right? And then to live long and well, there are certain positive conditions that are necessary for that. And so I think you are getting to the point where the measure of Black progress will be the quality of lives that Black people can live, right? Living just as long as other groups can when they're living at optimum health with optimum access to health care. With that in mind, my question to you would be, on behalf of those who argue that employment would be the measure of Black progress, how do you respond to someone asking, well, Dr. Williams, the issue is if Black people got jobs, good paying jobs, they would get good health care and wouldn't need Obamacare. So, and this is not a direct portrayal or reference to the likes of Thomas Sowell and other Black conservatives, but they do argue from the point of everything comes from Black people participating in America just like everyone else, getting a good job, making good decisions, and everything else will follow. So the issue isn't just simply not access to health care, it's the issue of Black people living by good culture and good values, getting a good job that will give them access to the resources of health care. What would your response be to that?
I feel it is wonderful and amazing. Yes, everyone could be gainfully employed. I love that phrase, gainfully employed, right? Yeah. But here's what is tricky for me. When you have the political calculation that says, as a nation, America, we're comfortable with 44 million people being uninsured, meaning if this pandemic comes and breezes through again and a whole lot of people of color, a whole lot of people in the margins die, we're okay with that. That's a calculation, right? And I'm not comfortable being in a nation where the governance is using the analysis that says it's okay if X amount of millions of you die. I'm okay with that, right? So that's not a high priority to ensure that the citizens are okay. And sometimes, yes, having the job conversation is great, but if you're not in your spiritually and health-wise, in your physical body, in your spiritual body, in your mental body, taken care of, you can get a job, you won't keep it. That's right. Or you'll stay at that same level. It won't progress. It won't accumulate a generational wealth. It'll stay very stagnant, right? So other communities who have benefited from long generations and generations of always having the right, it's almost a right for others, a privilege for others to be in communities where the optimum health care, optimum ability to go to therapists and just have all these access. A lot of us don't know that. So I have to prioritize spirit, mind, body over the intangible thing of just having a job in the moment. It's not deep enough of a solution.
Thank you. Anyone want to chime in on that?
Yeah, well, I think the two assumptions that are made by that statement. The first assumption is that you have an equal chance of getting a job like everybody else. Right. That's the first assumption. Right. And the second assumption is that you don't have the cultural capital to make it like everybody else in a job. And both assumptions are invalid. In terms of, if I had a job and I had health insurance, I'm going to get the same medical treatment as everybody else. Well, a report on unequal treatment that, has documented that, and that's not true. Black people with the health insurance get inferior health care. So, so these assumptions that are being made as if we live in a fair society, and that is not true.
Yes, Dr. Bembry.
Yeah, I want to respond to this question by, I can be a great theologian, a thinker, and all this, but sometimes I have to go back to my being a realist. Okay, what I am observing in New York, New Jersey, because I drive through many of our black neighborhoods, and there's something about when you drive through black neighborhoods. I mean, Newark, New Jersey is loaded, like New York, with a large homeless population. They're everywhere. And sometimes when I drive through Newark, I say, what happened? Why are there so many, particularly black males, who are unemployed? These guys, men don't have jobs. They're out there with the cups. And I remember one day I was driving through the inner city of Newark, and there was this man standing, holding on to a pole. I mean, like he was taking his last breath. And I'm saying, like you, my sister, this is the problem. If we're not addressing health, you can't even get to wealth because of a lot of the mortality rate for black men, as you know, is somewhere like 70 or something. It's low. I'm grateful that I've made it to where I am, but black. Yeah, I mean, black male mortality is low, and in Brooklyn, New York, I worked a lot with gun violence. Oh my God, the things I saw with black males who were being shot, killed, it's still going on. I'm like, something is wrong. And when I work with my white counterparts, they don't seem to get it. And it makes me angry because I believe for justice we got to have some anger. I get mad sometimes because these white folks, I remember when George Floyd happened, everybody was on the wagon, And then here we are 3 years later, and it's like we went back to being, many of my white friends, I keep telling them, you live a white privileged life. You don't understand what it's like to be a black and brown person because you live a white privileged life. New Jersey is one of the richest states in America. I did not know that. I'm learning about New Jersey. And New Jersey has one of the worst criminal justice systems in the nation. I work with, they call themselves returning citizens in Newark. These are men who were incarcerated for 20, 30. One guy was incarcerated 50 years. Now they're back in the real world. And I'm like, what happened? So I think we're not addressing the systematic causes of the people who are black and brown in our communities around mental health, around, Okay, the other issue that I'm discovering in downtown Newark, okay, here at this church that I'm pastoring now, we're in the midst of one of the massive gentrifications in Newark. We're right next door to the New Jersey Pack Center, for those of you who know New Jersey. For my people? No. They're not being built for my people. No. I want to say something else. Hell no. They're not being built for my people. I'm sorry, I'm a reverend, but I slip every now and then. It's not being built for my people. These buildings are being built for white people. who are coming into our neighborhoods. It's happening here in Harlem too, I'm sure, right? You know, everywhere we see these massive buildings being built, so the lack of affordable housing, all these issues are complicated, and all these things make us regress in lack of prosperity. So wealth, I think, needs to be analyzed, but I think, Dr. Henry, I think it's a complicated issue when we talk about wealth. Okay, that's my frustration feelings, okay?
Thank you, that's good. So the next question is directed towards you, Dr. Bembry, and likewise, everyone can chime in on it. And these questions are sort of avatars for those who are not here, you know, just to shake things up. You mentioned the positive role that the Black church played in the history of Black progress. These days, within recent decades, a lot of, especially the youth, Black youth, do not see the Black church as playing such a role.
I agree.
And many are finding new gods, maybe, or just giving up on God. There are groups such as the Black Hebrew Israelites who have taken ownership of or occupied that gap that they see as the Black church supposed to have occupied. Others are looking at African spirituality. Many are claiming Egypt, Kemet, as the mecca of their spiritual divinities. What do you say to that? What do you say to the critique of the Black church today in the way that some say, you know, man, there's a church on every corner.
You got that right.
But what are they doing for us?
Nothing.
Right?
Nothing.
So,
Sorry, you're not doing anything. Right.
Since you answered that so succinctly, what do you think the Black church can do, and even better yet, should be doing? Should the Black church stay in its lane? Maybe some say, you know, well, our job is to make sure you see the yellow brick road to heaven, right? Others, like King James Cone, see the church with another role. Right. Should the Black church continue that role that the Southern Christian Leadership Conference played, or has it evolved, or is the church off the game? What is your take as a theologian and reverend and scholar and activist?
Whoa, what a question. All right.
No pressure.
A lot of questions, yeah. Yeah, it requires critical thinking, and I like thinking. I think too much sometimes, so much that I can't sleep at night. I have to turn it off, but my brain is alert. There is definitely a legitimate critique for the Black church for today. It's valid. I happen to work with many college students on campuses in New Jersey, and I have to hear them say, "Ooh, you're Rev, huh? I ain't coming to church." They tell me bluntly, "I'm not coming." And they said, and then I try to invite them. "Oh, well, I got to dress up." I'm like, anyway, it's a complicated issue. I think the Black church is going through a major identity crisis right now, and it has a lot to do with the leadership of these Black churches, because a lot of these leaders in these Black churches, excluding the late Dr. Calvin Butts, you got Al Sharpton here in New York, many of these pastors have shifted from the prophetic role of justice for the church. They've left, they move that over, and they go into this feel-good theology. So people come to church because they want to feel good. Just do a hoop and say, "Oh, Sunday morning he arose," and you know, and people go and say, "Oh, we had church today." Well, what did he say? I don't know, but it sounded good, you know. There is a problem in the church I'm in Newark right now. That was one of the first questions they asked me before they asked me to come. They said, "Do you do that hooping stuff?" I said, "No, I'm not. That's not me. I'm a thinker. I'm a conversationalist." But they were concerned because you're Black, because I'm the first Black pastor they've ever had. This church has always had white ministers. I'm the first one in their 222 years. So they were like, "Oh my God, we got a Black man. What are we going to do?" So all of that. So Martin McMickle in his book here argues that there are basically different role models of what it means to be a black minister. He argues, he's quoting Peter Parrish, who taught at Princeton University. You probably heard of him. Yeah. Peter Parrish? Peter J. Parrish. Yeah, Peter J. Parrish, noted scholar, right? Right? Peter J. Parrish argues that there are many models of being a pastor. He calls it the priests. He says a lot of pastors act like priests, where they're into wearing the robe and the fancy suit and all of that, but they're not doing anything. You know, they're not addressing the needs of the community. So they're priests. And then he talks about, he has another model, he calls it the nationalistic model for being a minister, where there are many ministers like Reverend Raphael Womack and Calvin Butts and Adam Clayton Powell and all those guys who integrated religion with politics. Adam Clayton Powell, when I studied his life, this man was really a trailblazer here in Harlem because he integrated his political office and he brought it to Harlem with the Abyssinian Baptist Church. So I think a lot of pastors have lost that flavor of being prophetic. So young people are saying, okay, well, if you're not being prophetic, then what do you stand for? And my answer is a lot of our churches don't stand for anything outside of just Sunday morning, you know? They just come, the building opens up on Sunday, and then all during the week the gates go up, and it's locked. The church I'm in Newark has that problem. They're basically a Sunday morning gathering community. So I'm trying to get them to say, okay, open the doors. We got to do ministry all Monday, Tuesday. They're like, what's that? Because they're just used to Sunday morning. So I think that these are legitimate critiques the young people have for the black church. And I'm going to say this because I can be very radical. If I was young, I don't know if I would be bothered with going to church. Because I'm serious. When I look at the young people today, I'm like, wow, if I was your age, I don't know if I would be bothered either. I remember this one young man said to me something that was so powerful. I'm going to quote him. I'm not going to say his name. But he said, you know, Glenn, they call me Pastor Glenn. Pastor Glenn, why should I go to church? Because I can go to the bar and get a whole lot more love than I can at a church. He says, when I go to a bar, everybody is, hey, welcome, you want a drink? I'm like, wow. So he's using the image of the bar as being the place where people can feel belonging. I think churches, don't get me wrong, churches do bring belonging feelings to people, but it doesn't always do the best job. So these young people are giving some heavy critiques of the church, and we have to listen to them. And they say things like this young man just said, the quote I just gave to you, and it kind of blows your mind, but this is where they are. You got to listen to their critiques and be receptive to the fact that the church has lost its ability to be, I'm going to use this theological term. If there's no contextualization, get that word? Contextualization? Mm-hmm. That's a historical term too? Right. Exegesis, right? Where you research things within their context, right? Absolutely. Right. We use this term in theology too, about contextual theology, that theology has to emerge from where people are. And I think the church has lost that flavor. So on that note, I'm going to be quiet because I can go forever.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Dr. Whaley, anything on that question?
I was thinking as you were talking, I wanted to ask you a question.
Don't forget your mic.
What is this appeal about? What is this appeal about? What's that guy, Osteen? What is this appeal? Yeah, what is his appeal? I mean, people are mesmerized by him. Just tell me what is his technique? What is it that draws people to him?
Feel good.
That's
good.
It?
Yeah,
I think it's more than that because
he's a motivational speaker, and he's using a lot of entertainment and all that stuff that people want to. T.D. Jakes does it too, but T.D. Jakes is a little bit more real.
Yeah,
he deals with real stuff.
He moves around.
Yes,
this guy
sir.
just sits in one spot. So I'm not big on religion, I'm going to be honest with you too.
I hear you, brother.
You know,
I hear you, man.
I was just thinking about what you were saying though,
Yes,
because
sir.
even when I went to college, at least on Easter, we dressed up and went to church. Me and my roommates and then the girls, we actually went to church. We found a church in the community, we went. Because out of respect, I mean, I wasn't a big church, but we all went. Anyway, Well, I really want to get a sense of the mechanism by which this guy is capturing people's imagination. You know, because it seems to me that he's selling something that they're buying, and he's not delivering, but they're still buying.
Yes.
It's amazing to me.
This is my take on it, Dr. Whaley. I think there's a need for a lot of people today where people want to be entertained. You know, don't be messing in my business and all of that. Just entertain me, make me feel good. So Joel Osteen is fueling into, he's marketing, that's the word.
Okay.
He's marketing. Religion has a lot of marketing that goes on.
Okay. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah,
amazed.
T.D. Jakes is doing it too. They're all marketing.
But they're selling something that everybody's buying, but they're not delivering. And it doesn't
Yes,
make
sir.
sense to
Yes,
me.
sir.
It's
I
amazing.
agree, Dr. Whaley.
That's amazing to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just curious about it.
Okay.
Cool. You want to join in on
Yeah,
that?
I want to jump. Self-help. He'll sell 1 million books.
Yes, he will.
He won't never look back. But to the point about whether the church, the black church, because at its best, it is the most beautiful thing to experience what happened alongside King, the way that legacy, the King legacy, it is, as far as I can tell, it is all lost. It is completely lost. The last big movement in the community, Black Lives Matter, had no real church affiliation, no way to really connect young people, did that 100% separate.
There's no framework. There's no framework, really.
Yeah. So when the church is not relevant in the public square, you are just then a social club. You're hiding. Because if church and society can't somehow come together, okay, because you have all this Bible, you have all this theology, you have all this Christian social ethics, you have all these things. Solve one problem in real time. Pick up the mantle of some of the work. So I follow from our school, did you know Reverend William Barber was an alum of Drew? Oh, really? Drew Theological School. William Barber.
And I believe Calvin Butts.
Calvin Butts is also an alum. So to me, when I first landed, I said to Dr. Presley, one of our psychology professors, I said, what is this model that you're teaching where you have your spirituality and your justice are one and the same? They are dually aligned. Because just to have a Christianity that says, I feel good about myself and my family, me and mine, we're good, we pray, we do all right. That's too narrow. That's too shallow. So the depth of it has to be when you can take what goes on inside the sanctuary, bring it to the public square, solve one problem is my challenge for the church. So I have a lecture that I did about calling to action. All these young ministers that come through my classrooms, call them to action. What happened to the Poor People's Campaign? What happened to the King legacy? How dare you abandon the entirety of it? You can still remix it. You can make it your own. You can add hip hop. But don't abandon that work. Because guess what? That same voter registration and voter rights that my parents fought for during Jim Crow, it's back today. My parents, their grandparents, right? It's not, it's in cycles. It's like what Dr. Whaley said, it comes in cycles. So they had it solved, but now it's back. So to your question of progress in the black church, it's in a negative cycle right now. It's in a sleepy kind of cycle where it needs to wake up.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to leave the church alone for a second. All right, Dr. Whaley, and this will probably be my last question because y'all are answering these questions thoroughly. And we're going to open it up to anyone who wants to ask something. Okay, so Dr. Whaley, again, these questions are substitutes for people who are not here, okay? They're not me. So you mentioned an ongoing struggle. You referenced Malcolm X, the scenario of a knife being, someone being stabbed, and the knife being pulled out just partially, and rhetorically, that's an example. That's showing that that's not progress, and if there's any sort of stop in the direction of making things whole and better, we don't have progress. And I noticed that you've framed two possibilities of progress. And I'm not sure if you committed to one or the other, and so I'm going to press on this. One, you said, well, if progress is something that you see some improvement, but it lasts for about 50 years, and it's overturned, or even undermined, sabotaged, then perhaps that's not progress. If something is lasting, is sustainable, that in a sense could be a true example of progress. Is that where you stand?
Well, I said those are two ways of looking at progress. Where I stand, personally, in terms of perpetuity, I'm not sure, and I don't really see black people. This is kind of radical, but I'm not convinced. I was thinking about this yesterday because I was watching a program last night about a fugitive from America, and he's been living abroad for like 50 years, 40 years, and he's changed his life around, blah, blah, blah. But America still wants him to pay his debt. And he was an accessory. He didn't kill the person, but he was there, with a weapon. So, but he hasn't had a crime since, because one reason they can catch him because he hasn't committed a crime in 50 years. He's been in Africa, helping build dishes and all that stuff. He's been in Portugal, got married, got 2 kids, blah, blah, blah. So, but they still want him to pay for that crime that he committed. They want him to pay for the death of the person because he was there. He's like, I'm sorry for that, but I didn't kill the person. And the person killed him. He said, I'm not apologizing for anything. So there you got 2 different mindsets there. So for me, using that case as representative of America, I don't think we'll ever make a progress in America. True progress. Because America won't let us.
Okay, this is getting interesting here. All right, so we're in a good place because I have a quote here from Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? From his book. I'm sure many of us are familiar with it. Where do we go from here? Yeah. He says, and then this is directed towards you, Dr. Whaley. Martin Luther King Jr., his spirit is saying on his panel, first, the line of progress is never straight. For a period, a movement may follow a straight line, and then it encounters obstacles and the path bends. It is like curving around a mountain when you are approaching a city. Often it feels as though you are moving backward and you lose sight of your goal. But in fact, you are moving ahead, and soon you will see the city again closer by. We are encountering just such an experience today. The inevitable counter-revolution that succeeds every period of progress is taking place. Failing to understand this as a normal process of development, some Negroes are falling into unjustified pessimism and despair. Focusing on the ultimate goal and discovering it's still distant, they declare no progress at all has been made. You and Dr. Martin Luther King, go.
Well, I've read that book. I remember that book. And one of the things I remember about that book...
I'll use the mic, please.
One of the things I remember about that book is that Martin Luther King also made a recommendation for reparations in that book. Oh, yeah. He said that reparations is very easy. All you have to do is create a similar Marshall Plan as they did after World War II, and we would be fine. Have we seen it? That's my last question, my comment.
Okay. All right. I'll come back to my questions, but I want to make sure we get time for anyone who wants to ask a question. Please come on up.
The topic of the end of affirmative action came up. I'm Jones Murphy, by the way. The topic of the end of affirmative action came up. And I want to make the point that affirmative action didn't end at all. We have massive programs, like 45% of people at Harvard are either the kids of alumni, the kids of big donors, or they're in these niche sports like sailing and golf, where it's very expensive. It's very expensive to even get involved in that sport. So what happened actually with what the Supreme Court did was they shut down a very small percentage of affirmative action, the type that's available to black people. And they left 99% of quotas and affirmative action in place. So all of the seats that are freed up, they're not going to go to people like me. I got perfect SAT scores at a very young age. I went to college at 15.
15.
And it's not people like me that are going to benefit from this decision. Wow. It's going to be people like George W. Bush.
Absolutely.
Very
Absolutely.
Mediocre person.
I-
Very
I-
mediocre individual,
I'm-
who yet went to Yale and Harvard.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the only thing I would say to you is you should point out to people that it is affirmative action, but they call it legacy.
Yes.
So that it's really affirmative action, but it's called legacy, and they distinguish legacy from affirmative action. So they sneak in their friends and their family, and actually they do that more, and that hurts people more of Asian descent and other descent than affirmative action does. But see, this is how racism works. You know, they focus on affirmative action, which is designed to rectify social injustice, as opposed to, if they're really about unfairness, that's unfair because these people are privileged, you know?
Right.
So they should attack them. But why are they not attacking them? They're going to attack the vulnerable. You know, they rather attack somebody in terms of social, who's trying to do something about social injustice than attack people who are benefiting and being unfair.
They're using this dishonest language to divide us against ourselves. So many of us heard this and said, oh yeah, affirmative action is over. Not true. It's huge. It's growing.
Yeah,
it's big.
But I would
but it's not for us.
I would remind people, though, that what you're saying is important, but that they call it legacy even though it is affirmative action. That's the only point I would make.
And unfortunately, some of us people of color joined in this effort.
True.
Right? Joined in this effort, took down affirmative action, thinking it was going to free up places for people of color. This is not true. More white people are going to take those slots.
Yeah, absolutely.
The bulk of the people who are benefiting
every place
from
has
this
happened, like in
decision.
California and Colorado and all these, every place this has happened. You're absolutely right.
I went to Caltech. I did my graduate work in physics at Caltech. I was the poorest person at that school. It was amazing to me how much wealthy, like the Vietnamese boat people were much richer than I had grown up in the Caribbean. I grew up in hunger. I grew up in a predominantly black colony of the British Empire.
Wow.
I knew what hunger is. I knew poverty. These people, even the boat people from Vietnam, when you check their backgrounds, were like really wealthy.
Yeah.
You know, they were like, well, my dad was a translator for the French colonial rulers and blah, blah, blah. So we had to leave, Vietnam and stuff. And I realized, man, these places like MIT, Caltech, the most elite, the hardest universities to get into, are full of people from very well-off backgrounds.
Sure.
There are very, very few people like us that really come from serious hard suffering.
Good point.
Very few. And they bitterly resented me. They hated my guts. They hated my effing guts. I was a living embodiment of everything that they'd been told does not and should not exist. You know?
May I respond to your question?
Sure.
Your point, I really hear you loud and clear, sir. I'm a student at the, what is called the Academy of Clinical Applied Psychoanalysis. It's in Livingston, New Jersey. Notice how I said Livingston, New Jersey. So here I am studying how to become a certified mental health therapist, and I've discovered that I am one of the few educated black males in the school. And like you, my brother, I have to navigate through all this racism that comes at me, microaggressions. It comes at me all the time because I'm not supposed to be in, working on a mental health degree because you're a black man. You're not supposed to be here. What are you doing here? So I have to really work hard, to let my white counterparts know that there are black people who can formulate a sentence. We know what adverbs are. We know what pronouns are. We're educated. You know what I'm saying? But it's frustrating, and I find myself becoming discouraged a lot because there are very few other black and brown students in the school. And so the school has made me the leader of what they call diversity and inclusion, and they didn't know what they were doing when they put me in that role. And here I am saying, hey, white people, wake up, you're racist. And they're like, what? That's not diversity and inclusion. Hey, your job is you're supposed to get more black and brown people to come to our school. I'm like, well, they're not going to come here if they experience this racism that you guys have here. So I'm trying to get these white people to undo their racism, and they don't want to let go of it. So, I just, when you told your story about education, I was thinking about where I am right now. It's frustrating the hell out of me, but I am determined that I'm going to graduate from the school because these white people are not going to run me away because I've put a lot of money into my education. So I just need to say that.
Just let me jump in. So, Dr. Henry, we made, in our brother's question, it may have answered something about progress.
Yes.
So the fact that affirmative action is no longer law of the land, or whatever way you want to frame that, could be an indicator of progress, which means we went too far. Too many talented black proteges at the age of 15 coming through elite schools, Dr. Henry's coming through with PhDs. It made someone uncomfortable to see so many of us starting to fight it out. They said African American women are the most educated group in all the groups. Wow. All groups. Because what are we doing? Raising kids, getting degrees, trying to, they're trying to win. You understand? So we went too far. So could that be progress? That too many of us showed up in physics departments and making others feel uncomfortable and not so good about themselves? You want to psychoanalyze it, let's get to the heart of why these happen, because it's okay for a thing to happen. I want to know why it happened. They take it off the table because when they thought we weren't smart, we didn't know anything, they said, let's give them affirmative action. These dumb groups over here, they need it. They won't get nowhere. Right. And then some of us showed up and really showed up in the sciences, in mathematics, in all kinds of areas, right? In medical school, in psychology. And it made someone nervous. So could that in itself be an indicator of progress?
Dr. Sharon, almost reading my mind here. So I was going to pose a question to you all, but you called something to my mind, something else. One pattern we do see, I feel, to your point, is the concept of the backlash. And we see this throughout American history. Yep. And if we start off with just the Civil War, freed slaves, there was an insurgence of black people into every aspect of American society: education, politics, economics, sharecropping, and we just took off almost before the Reconstruction officially set in. And then they had to curve that around 1977, I believe, around there. 1877, yes. And so this is just one example of that counter-revolution I think Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about. And we can see that all the way throughout in every aspect of black history. The burning of Black Wall Street. Pull yourself up with your own bootstraps. Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? And next thing you know, you see exponential improvement, unexpected improvement, and then there's a backlash to that. And so I'm inclined to see these as signs of progress.
Amen.
Right? It reminds me of a football game. You score, and you make a touchdown, they're gonna crack down with a different defense to try to stop your progress. And this is what we have to see in sort of political chess. Same thing happened with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That was an extraordinary success. But then in the 70s and 80s and 90s, historians call that period the conservative revolution, a backlash to that progress, which this book here, The Myth of Black Progress, Alfonso Pinckney writes about. And what's amazing about this book, he's arguing, it looks like he's arguing against black progress. He acknowledges it, but what he's arguing is the idea put forth by black and white conservatives, and sociologists mainly, that because gains have been made, black people no longer need these social programs, public programs. But he's saying, no, we have not met the mark yet. We have not reached equity or equality, however you want to put it. And as we know, there's a book, When Affirmative Action Was White, really speaks to the fact that affirmative action is always, it's a staple of American society, but for the white community. And so that is a way to obstruct black progress by sort of the way Jones was arguing it, by saying, okay, we're gonna remove affirmative action, but in a real sense, affirmative action remains by different names via legacy, for example. So with that in mind, though, there's more I can say on that, but that just struck a chord. I do see, if I were to put my opinion out here, that there is black progress, and what the sign of black progress would be backlashes. Wherever you see a backlash, you can find progress. All right.
There's a backlash, yes.
Or else there's no need for a backlash. Right? You think about the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was born in 1866. Why? What was the need of the Ku Klux Klan? What was the need of Plessy versus Ferguson? But my question is to you, and this will be my final question before we wind and dine and chat. Unless anyone else have a question, please come up and let me know. Do you see yourselves as examples of black progress?
Individual progress, maybe. Individual progress, maybe. I'm still thinking about it, but I don't know. Writing a book on black individualism, and that's been what this society has promoted among black people, because it's least threatening. You can have all the black billionaires you want, because they're not going to spend a dime to help the rest of the black people. You can have Oprah going off to Italy and show how wonderful it is. You can have all these people buying $24 or $50 billion home, and you can have 75 or 80,000 homeless black people, and everybody's happy. Because it's about the individual, it's not about the group. So I have some data, national data, that I'm going to look at to see what it means mentally. Because I think there's something wrong with that idea. I think there's something wrong with a person who can sit and spend all this money and watch other people suffer. I don't know. Maybe I'm just naive, but I just think it just bothers me that people can do that. And they have the ability to do that.
That's a Western concept, because in the African context, we go in community.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's very Western to be me.
Right.
That's not our value. That's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
historically
Well,
our value.
I would like to think that. I hope so. Yeah.
May I respond briefly?
Yeah. Well, I want each of you to respond, but I want to come back to Dr. Whaley. So are you saying that if you were to characterize your success as a scholar as individual progress?
Yeah.
So this is an issue of interpretation, because black conservatives would say, yeah, that's right. And so if every other black person just did what you did, then we will have no need. So do you hold that position? If you are possible. Now, others may argue, like myself, that you are a product of the past efforts of those who broke ground for you and us to have the opportunity for education success.
I mean, look, I was one of 4 kids they picked out of a school, public school in Harlem, and say, let's try this experiment, see what happens. And they picked pretty well. That's all I can say, because I did okay. you know. 2 of us went on to private high schools, did okay. 2 of us went back to public schools and wind up in jail. What can I say?
Okay.
That's
We were all considered the gifted group. So what can I say?
So I'm going to press a little bit more. So would you agree with Thomas Sowell on this situation, is using you as an example of black individualism progress works? Let's look at Dr. Whaley. And he co-signs it. He says it's individualism, so there's no need for affirmative action.
I disagree with that.
And on what grounds?
Well, because, I mean, I have to have a mind. I have to have something going on up there. But I also have to have opportunities. Without opportunities, I mean, I know some of the smartest guys wind up being drug dealers and winding up in jail. A friend of mine wound up in jail, and he learned how to use computers in jail, got out of jail, and got a job.
Fair. Okay, let's open it up. Yes.
To answer your question,
Yes.
do I see myself as an example of black progress?
Yes.
Yes, I do. Whenever I walk into my school in Livingston, New Jersey, I really feel like there is a God, because I feel like I'm not supposed to be there, but I'm there. And so when I'm in this school studying psychoanalysis, I'm feeling like, okay, because I'm not supposed to be there. There are not many my brother Dr. Whaley is a black male therapist, but there are very few black male therapists around these days.
Very true. I have to sign off on that.
Yeah, it's not many, so I feel progress with that. And then when I go into this massive building in Newark now, as the first African American pastor, and I stand in that big old sanctuary, I'm like, wow. I mean, it's like I can't believe I'm there. I'm the first black pastor they've had, and I'm there. So those are ways I feel like I'm an example of progress. And also, finally, is when I go to college campuses and interact with young people, because I feel like I'm grandpa when I go with the young people. I'm like, oh, I'm grandpa, because I'm old enough to be their grandfather. And they are asking me about wisdom, and I'm passing on, because I think that's African, where we pass on our legacies, we give it away. That's part of our African culture, where we take, it takes a whole village to raise a child. So I think, and those are some ways that I see how I'm an example of black progress. That's how I see what I'm doing.
Let me jump right in there before we go to Dr. Williams. So when you say you see yourself as an example of black progress,
Yes.
And one example I'm going to pick on the example you use. I think there's other examples, I know you. One could say, okay, being the first in a space that's predominantly occupied by white folks, what does that have to do with the neighboring blocks in Newark?
What does that have to do with the neighboring blocks in Newark?
Yeah, and the underprivileged, underclass, so-called communities. How does that connect to them?
Well, as the first black pastor of First Baptist Petty Memorial Church, I'm trying to wiggle this church to the needs of the black and brown communities, who are the majority of the people who live in the city of Newark. Newark is made up about 300,000 people or so. The majority of people who live in Newark are people who are African descent. So being in this church, I would like to be an advocate for justice around the downtown Newark area, around mental health, addressing the homeless problem. Hey, by the way, this church we have homeless people who sit on our church steps. They're there all the time. Even on Sunday mornings when I'm driving, they're out there. I'm like, whoa, I got 2 churches. I got to go and greet my homeless population. So I'm like, hey, I'm here, Pastor Glenn. And they're like, oh, you're the pastor of this big church? I said, yeah, I'm the pastor. So I feel like I got to connect with my people in the neighborhood, which is a lot of work. So did I answer your question, Dr. Henry?
Yeah. I was,
Okay.
you recall me, I was checking something. So there's been a lot of critique against the black middle class or the black elite and educated, and saying that cannot, is not, those folk are not the gladiators of progress. But there's a debate that they can be, and so I really appreciate your response, because you exemplified, the role or activity or the responsibilities of those who can break ground in certain spaces, and keeping that in mind, right? And so that's what I find very, very positive. So let's go to Dr. Williams on this.
I don't like this question one bit. So I'm going.
You don't like it?
I don't like it one bit. So I'm going to deal with this question because, on the one hand, for my students in my classroom, yes, I would like to model the fact that I'm first generation. Yes. You can do it too. I love that idea, but if some of us are not free, none of us are free, right? Good point. So the thing about this black skin, it's a kinship. Amen. Right? So if we don't go together, then, there's always going to be that stigma that we all, so it's great for some of us to get out, but then you will always have to remember somebody in the family didn't make it. Somebody in the community didn't make it. There's still more work to be done, right? And that's the burden of it. Because if you just say, okay, a few of you guys can make it through, then that's almost like tokenism. That borders on that just how dare you limit us, right? So let's talk about this American scheme. Our folks bought here from Africa, we weren't bought here for full equality. We were bought here to be a permanent underclass, to never reach equality, and to be in slavery into perpetuity, and to never leave it, right? So in that idea, what we can be socially, what we can be culturally, what we can be politically, it has to be an entire effort so that as many of us as possible can go forward. Otherwise, it's not authentic, and I still have to then challenge my country and say, why was it okay to leave so many of us behind in your policies, in your criminal justice system, where so much negativity is still on your American statutes even now, today. So many laws that could have been turned, that could have made things more inclusive. So many things from every area. So for one of us to get out, and I'm happy to be out. I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. A lot of people didn't make it out of my graduating class. A lot did, but not all made it. You understand? So I go back, I teach 10 minutes from where I grew up. That's a blessing to be able to do that and to show those students how to dream. So I'm into this concept of Afrofuturism. So when you go and you pay your money to see Black Panther, and you can imagine a future, right, where Black people are leading societies where they have science that nobody else has, and technology that no one else can touch, and they're warriors that are, fully in command. There's no colonization in Wakanda. There's no gentrification. You know what I'm saying? So you get to imagine beyond what is reality here, right? So that's more of my vision than just, woo, I'm glad I made it out. Because that's one dynamic, but it's too narrow. It has to be deeper than that.
Good point. Wow, this is great. What I see you focusing on is how to do Black progress, right? And the responsibilities that are bestowed on each of us, all right? And what we sort of owe each other, and the cultural and generational and historical debt, it seems to be bringing out. And along with that, you seem to have given a proposal of what Black progress looks like. Would it look like Wakanda for you?
Wakanda forever.
Wakanda forever. So we have the first succinct description of what Black progress would look like. I would like to go to the other panelists before we close out. In a sentence or two, how would you describe what Black progress look like to you?
Black progress would look like to me.
I'll get the mic. Don't forget your mic.
What do Black progress look like to me? It would look like Africa, basically. That's all Black
Look like
progress would look
Africa.
like me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Bembry.
Black progress for me would look, I'm going back to Martin Luther King's words, I have a dream that one day this nation shall live up to the true meaning of its creed. And then he says, I have a dream that one day my four little children will not be judged by the content of their character. I think Black progress for me would look like a world where we embrace diversity, because even within Black and Brown, we're very diverse. We have different cultures. You know, this church that I'm in right now, I'm recognizing I'm African American. I have members who are from the continent of Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, all these different countries, and I'm like, wow, there's a different culture. So my vision of Black progress would be a vision where we embrace and open ourselves to everyone. Because the color of my skin is just like a little piece of, it's a major part of who I am, but I see myself as more than just an African American. I'm a human being. And I think if we embrace that power to help people realize that they are bigger than skin color, and where people are not going to be judging you by, oh, you're Black or whatever, and we just find ways to live in a world that's together. To me, that's justice. That's justice in my mind. I mean, we don't even need to, the LGBTQ community is going through a lot of backlashes now too with the U.S. Supreme Court decision. So that's a whole nother justice piece that we have to talk about too. Churches are struggling with the LGBTQ issue, including the one that I'm in right now in Newark. But a lot of Black churches are becoming more open and welcoming to people who are LGBTQ part of the community. So that's a whole nother layer of diversity and being open to everybody.
Thank you. So I guess in summing up, in my final reflection, okay, all right, we have a question, a statement. All right, we're going to take this, and then come on up. And then we'll be wrapping up. Please come, share your name if you like.
Hi, my name is Bijou. My name is Bijou Kanyambo, and thank you for being here. I have two questions, right? So it's fascinating what your definition of Black progress is, and as you described it to be Wakanda. And I thought that was fascinating because that requires isolation, like intentional isolation. And I was curious and that's very controversial, like a form of segregation almost, right? And I was just curious about that. Like, obviously the concept of Wakanda is not realistic, right? But in your opinion, when we think about isolation and we think about segregation, how would that play out in your opinion, right? Okay. And then the second question was, when we think about, you guys mentioned something like, oh, you think of yourself as you're the first to be in this space, right? And that's something you recognize in certain circumstances, and it's almost like a mind, at least for me, when I felt that way, it's triggered my imposter syndrome. It's triggered my own maybe insecurities that I felt in those spaces, even though maybe I deserved to be there. And one thing I wanted to ask, like, how much of that is a psychological veil of like, like you're qualified, you were meant to be in that space, but just the thought of you recognizing that you're not supposed to be there, but you are there, how much that gets in the way of you actually not reaching your full potential, right? But sort of living in the moment and reaching the potential that you wanted. So I'm not sure if that was clear enough, but those are the two questions I wanted to ask. Thank you.
What's your name?
Thank you.
Bijou? Bijou. Okay. Thank you, Bijou. Let's give it some hands. So let me speak quickly to segregation, because here it is. So the Wakanda imagination is really just about getting people to, imagine a black excellence to a level that is, the top of your imagination, just as far as you can go. Is it segregated? Yes, but guess what? I already feel segregated, right? We're already segregated in our ghettos. We are segregated and separated from the full wealth and participation in the country that our forefathers and mothers who were enslaved Africans, they built it, and we maintain a second-class citizenship in this country. We've had to fight for every inch of the progress that we've had, right? So the exercise of imagining, and even if it is segregated, it's a moment for a person to imagine themselves without the chains, which are mental, which are psychological. Everything that I've learned that is most compelling about race it's a psychological torture. Mm-hmm. Racism in America, it feels like a psychological gamesmanship that's been going on for generation and generation. Mm-hmm. So to be separated is sometimes maybe even necessary in some just to gain your own sense of health and well-being, right? So I'm okay with some separation that's on my terms. Now, when they separate me, they're going to give me the worst. They're going to put me in the slums. They're going to do all these kinds of things. But if it's separation on my terms, I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. And I'll let my co-panelists speak on to.
Yeah, I just want to say very briefly, I appreciated your comment about being the first, the burden of being the first. There, especially, when Barack Obama was the first black president, and I related to Barack Obama because you notice how he led our country as the first African American president. He did it he had massive attacks coming at him from white people saying he wasn't a U.S. citizen and all that. So there's a tremendous burden of being the first. But one thing I noted from Barack Obama, because I watched the brother and I'm reading his book now called The Promised Land. That's a great book. Barack Obama is an interesting guy because most of his books, notice he's always smiling. I'm like, why does he smile so much? All the crap he went through, but he doesn't lose his smile, So this book is powerful about the Promised Land, but I'm learning that Barack Obama and all people who are first, I believe Barack Obama was what I call one of the greatest presidents this country has ever had. He doesn't get the credit because he was a black person. So what I'm learning too with being the first in my school is that sometimes white people don't want to give me credit for anything, but I have to toot my own horn, and in this church I'm the first, and so there's a big burden of being the first, because when you're the first, it's like you're standing on what's your term again? Wakanda. You're standing on Wakanda. You're standing on the legacy of so many people who came before you. So when I see myself as the first, I feel like I'm standing upon the legacies of my ancestors, and they're all saying, "You go, boy. You do it. You do it. We couldn't do it, but you're doing it. Do it. Do it." So it's a burden that I feel with being the first. I hope I tried to answer your question. Okay? Yes.
For both of those questions, with the segregation question, I grew up in a segregated South. It's not a problem. Being the first, I've always been the first or the only one. I always led the pack, And, I've been okay with that. Because always for me, I never really thought about it until recently when I talk to people, I talk about being the first. It never was an issue for me. It was just be the best that you can be, and that's all I did.
All right, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed this session. Can we give the panelists a hand, please? So again, for those of you who are watching online, and for those of you who are here, this is the Political Soul Food Forum. The aims of this project is to bring us together, and as a point and mark of progress. I see these get-togethers as progress, when we can come and share our wisdom, our experiences, and to keep each of our fires lit as we go out individually, but also knowing that we are a part of a bigger, growing wildfire that has been lit by our ancestors. So let's keep burning and purifying and aim for the cause of justice, as you put. And I do like that framing of Black progress, the city of justice, if I may. And I think we're heading in that direction in so many ways. I know some may disagree, but I just think moments like this represent a moment of progress when we come together and see each other and build together, because we're fortifying the walls. We're extending, if I may, Jacob's ladder, right? So thanks again to everyone who've come here. Please follow us on Instagram at Political Soul Food Forum, one word, and we're on Facebook. It's not Facebook, YouTube, Political Soul Food Forum. We will be doing this more frequently, and with your support, we'll be able to have very insightful and encouraging panels such as the one we had today. Can we also give a hand to the leader of this establishment, BJ, who graciously let us come here. And let's also please show our thanks and our participation in the menu. So what I propose, if all of you are willing to chop it up afterwards, they can wine and dine. I'll be here for a while to talk to the panelists and all of you, if you want to, over dinner. That's part of Political Soul Food. All right, thanks again, and until next time.